All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Rise Zion. We are so excited to have Ryan back with us again today. We have a very, very important topic that we'd like to discuss with you, and some really interesting news that I have never heard before. You are not going to want to miss this. It has to do with General Conference protesters. Okay, and if you live in Utah and if you've attended General Conference, you know exactly what I mean. But for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are not even members of the church, you may not be aware that every year at General Conference, we have these protesters and they swarm in, like, apparently from everywhere. And they come in and they protest, and they have these big old signs and they yell things. And actually, Ryan, I want to tell a little story, if that's okay with you, about my personal experience. Okay, so this is one of my core memories, you guys, and maybe many of you have a similar story out there in the audience, and I want to hear about it in the comments if you do. But when I was about 9 or 10, my family had the opportunity to go to General Conference. Now, this isn't something that you can just go to. You have to get the tickets to go. It's like there's not that many seats, compared to how many members there are. Okay, so you have to get the tickets to go. It's a big deal. Okay, well, it was for me anyway. Now, so we obtained the tickets, and so we go up there, and I'm 9 years old. Like, I had no idea that this was a thing. Okay. And so we find their parking. Parking's crazy as usual in Salt Lake City. And we start making our way to the conference center. It's a little bit cold. The sun is shining. Things are a little bit frosty, because it's early spring. And it was just a beautiful day, but then I noticed that there's this crowd of people. So we're walking in this group of other Latter-day Saints, right? And then off to the side, you have these people, and they sound angry, right? And I just remember this so vividly. And they have these big black signs, and they have nasty looking like demonic symbols written on these black signs, and they're yelling at people and they're screaming at them. And I remember so vividly protesters yelling at my parents because we were kids, and they said, this is Satan's church, and you're bringing your kids to see Satan's General Conference, and this is not appropriate for children. And that stuck with me. That has stuck with me as a core memory throughout my entire life. And Ryan, but I want to make this point very, very clear, that when we went into General Conference, there was absolute peace. Okay. And another core memory that I have very vividly is when we all stood up to support and to sustain the prophet, who at the time was President Hinckley, right? And just the spirit that filled the room and the peace that was in that room testified to me that this church is true. And I am very grateful, actually, for these core memories because of the contrast. You can see by contrast the darkness that exists in these protesters and compare that to the light and truth that exists in the General Conference Center, in the church itself, right? And it's just stunning on one hand, right? Because it's stunning to me that you have bigotry like this that exists still in the United States. There's very few people in the United States who can say that one of their core memories is bigotry. Okay, probably Jewish kids probably face this as well. I'm almost certain that happens. But this is something that's rare in the United States, and that I grew up with this in 1999 is remarkable in many ways. But Ryan, you have something very important that you're going to share with us today. And to me, this is breaking news. I have never heard of this before. Do you want to go ahead and present this topic for everybody?
For sure. And thanks for that, for that intro. You're right. This is probably brand new information for most members. And what troubled me, and this really threw up the red flag, is you try to research it and there's almost nothing about it. In fact, most of the stories that do talk about it are very watered down.
Interesting. Well, and it's very interesting because these protests happen twice a year, okay? Because we have semi-annual General Conference, and it's been happening, I mean, in one of your videos that you mentioned, it happened as early as 1990s, but I see videos of protests that go back all the way to the 1980s.
Hmm.
So, I mean, this is something that happens twice a year. And you would think that they might take a break, 1 year. Maybe there won't be any protests, but no, there's always a horde of protesters. I mean, this is a big deal. Um, why are they there?
Yeah.
And I think what you're getting here, Ryan, is what you're getting to here is that there seems to be more going on here than meets the eye. There seems to be organization.
So what we want to look at then is some of this history with the protesters and the interactions that have taken place, because we do have some stories, and FAIR Group, FAIR LDS, has done some good research on this in the past, where it used to be that missionaries were assigned to stand around along the picket line and even interact with these protesters.
Okay, interesting. So these are like, I don't know, like they're not undercover per se, but they are there, kind of picking up on what's going on, what's happening
Right.
in this
Yeah.
crowd of
Yeah.
people. That's very
Yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like they were assigned to gather intelligence, like if you're in a military operation, they're kind of but they're kind of there to listen and just to see what's going on. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
just as missionaries do anyway, right?
Yeah.
Their assignment, of course, is always going to be to try to de-escalate and to create a counter presence to the protesters. But in that process, it's important for anyone engaging in that way to understand who they're working with, who they're talking to.
Mhm.
And so asking questions, learning who they are is a big part of that. And so, yes, intelligence gathering is a natural part of that kind of work. It's a natural part of being a missionary, right?
Yeah.
So that we can meet people where they're at by getting to know them. And what they found and what they have said in these articles is very, very telling and very important for all of us to understand, because they're describing people that they've interacted with on these picket lines, creating disruption, harassing Latter-day Saints in their own communities,
Hmm.
who are being flown in from out of state and are being paid quite well to be there.
So they actually discovered and got admissions from people that they were being paid and flown in order to be here and protest against a religious minority in the country. This is fascinating news, Ryan.
Amazing,
Like
right? Yeah.
this is amazing. And can you imagine this kind of a story breaking, for any other religious minority in the country?
It's
Can you
amazing
imagine?
that it's not more reported on, that there aren't more articles about it. Even the Salt Lake Tribune, they've done some very watered down stories about the protests,
Oh yeah.
and
And I'm
they
sure they make it
miss
kind of
all of the
sound like
details.
it's kind of our fault in the first place that they have protests there anyway.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, I
yeah.
always tend to refer to them as pseudo journalists anyway.
Yeah, they they're awful. I really do not like the Salt Lake Tribune.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, this is absolutely remarkable. Like I can't imagine this happening anywhere else. Can you imagine protest? I mean, now there's protests for and there's reports also that these protesters in colleges were being paid by George Soros
Exactly. Yeah. There's so many
against the Jewish
parallels
people.
today. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Against Israel, all the Israel protests at colleges across the country, these Ivy League schools,
Mm.
very left-leaning schools, by the way. And yeah, they tend to be funded with political interests in mind. And big donors like George Soros are part of that. And he's not the only one, unfortunately. Unfortunately, again, most of these people tend to be aligned on one side of the political aisle. Let's not be mistaken about it, is the Democratic Party. And this is just the latest of parallels that we can find that's attached to or look very similar to what we see with the protests in Salt Lake.
Mm.
Again, they seem to be most heavily organized in their efforts in the late 90s to early 2000s and onward. But of course, these have been going on for much longer. It's hard to, again, get good information on it, but Are these the same people every year or every half year? Um, are we getting different groups of people, different denominations? Because generally, the Latter-day Saint Church has good relationships with the other denominations in the area.
Yeah, we get
But
along with
of
people.
course, yeah, and it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that some of these other denominations are actively pushing protests. Sure, we have to consider that that is an option. But is there other motives going on as well? Is there other things going on? And I would suggest that there is a strong possibility that there is, and there's some really interesting conspiracies we can get into about
Yes.
that. It goes all the way back to the um, the end of the Second World War.
Well, yeah,
There
and
was,
you say
yeah,
conspiracy, Ryan, but I think that I mean it is conspiracy in that perhaps some of these things aren't, verified with exact
right,
data, but I mean it's not without precedent. This has happened.
exactly. It has
So,
happened, and it's happened again and again in
mm,
other types, with other issues, usually political issues or economic issues. But religion has often been tied to this, and LDS history is full of these exact same scenarios where, in fact, it was political interests motivating the bigotry against Latter-day Saints, and the religious aspects being different from others was just the smokescreen or the cudgel used to
mm,
attack the Latter-day Saints
yeah.
for other purposes.
Yes, and you've brought this up like many different times on my channel. I think this is really, really fascinating that as a voting bloc, Latter-day Saints have an enormous amount of influence and power.
Right, right.
And when they moved to Missouri, you said, right? This group of Yankees basically moved into the middle of the South here, and they were, they were anti-slavery, and they were afraid that the Mormons were just going to come in and take over, which they kind of did, and in some ways they did, until they
Mhm.
were driven out and exterminated from the area, right?
Right. One of the big issues that sparked the violence in Missouri that led to the expulsion of the Saints was over election integrity. They were trying to bar Latter-day Saints from voting. And why would they do that? Because they knew that if they allowed the Latter-day Saints to vote, their party and their people would never win an election again. And so fights broke out, and this led to the arming of the militia and on until, the expulsion. So,
Yeah.
right? But it all started with a fight over should Latter-day Saints be allowed to vote.
Yeah.
And it was repeated again in Nauvoo. So just a few years later, you had it was the competing city to Nauvoo for commerce on the upper Mississippi. Um, One particular guy, I'm forgetting his name right now, but you had an individual who had lost an election to a Mormon,
Hmm.
and he went on a tirade, bought a newspaper, and all he printed was anti-Mormon stuff because he
Because he
lost an
lost an
election.
election.
Right, that was why. He
Huh.
actually liked the Latter-day Saints before that. He was there at the dedication of the Nauvoo temple,
Wow.
and he praised the industry of the Latter-day Saints, and then he lost an election, and then he managed to stir up all of the other communities, and this of course led to the arming of the militia,
Hmm.
the turncoats who using their position in the militia to actually start a coup against the governor of Illinois, Governor Ford. And this was also intricate to the assassination of Joseph Smith,
Hmm.
who was running for political office. And yeah,
Yeah.
it was all politically motivated to a very large extent, larger than is often talked about. Unfortunately, we tend to focus too much on the smokescreen, the fact that there was religious differences and people attacking the saints because of religion. No, it was because of economics and politics, and they used religion as a cudgel in that case. And
Hmm.
again, it happened in Idaho in the late 1800s when the territory was actually originally settled by Latter-day Saints in the 1860s. And then you got an influx of people from, of all places, Missouri, and they kind of took over, and they wanted their political party to win. They were actually trying to get the Republican Party a leg up over there, and they disenfranchised all Latter-day Saints. And they did it a very sneaky way, but basically they, without going too much into the details, they took away the vote of Latter-day Saints in Idaho in order to establish their political party. And they used polygamy, of all things, specifically as the cudgel in that case. And this is actually a stated fact by the people involved. There was a man named Fred Dubois, who was the sheriff. He became a political activist at that time, and the first state senator for Idaho when it became a state. And anyway, Dubois specifically wrote in his own private journal that they actually didn't care so much about polygamy, but they used it as a cudgel to get political gains.
Wow.
So that's a stated fact that it was political.
Wow. That's just crazy.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like, it's even more nefarious because it's like it would be one thing if you actually believed what you were spewing is bigotry. Right? But they don't. They're just using the masses. They're using the mob basically to get what they want politically. So that is just...
And that really brings us to today, because when you watch these protesters down in Salt Lake, around the conference center, does it really seem genuine? Who can maintain that level of...
Yeah, that fever pitch of insanity.
Right, yeah. Or is it just an act? Is it part of theater?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you have a point there. I mean, this every single year, 2 times a year, these people have time to take off from their schedule to fly out or to be bussed in. You know, this fever pitch of hatred towards a faith that, I mean, most people view as fairly milquetoast, and really we are very milquetoast people. and I mean, like, just the fever pitch of insanity is something to consider here, I think.
It really becomes so clear, I think, at least to me, when I see over the last 10 years the different kinds of protests and the sheer magnitude of manufactured outrage towards one political party or opponent. And we know now, looking back, that, oh yeah, it was manufactured. It was bought and paid for.
AstroTurf. Yeah, I mean, like, it screams AstroTurf. It really does. And now that you've brought this information to my attention, I can't unsee it. Like the fact that this could be, it probably is AstroTurf, as opposed to grassroots. Those of you who are not familiar with the political terms, there's AstroTurf, which is fake, right? And then there's grassroots, which is a movement from the bottom up, you know, of people.
Right.
But yeah, I can't unsee it now.
I don't think a lot of people can unsee it once they really put these pieces together. It does make so much sense.
So
that gets into the question, of course, why then the protest in Salt Lake?
Yeah,
what's really
going on
it,
here
right?
Specifically? Do you have any theories as to why the protests here every single year for so long?
Oh, I sure do. And we've discussed some of this on your channel before. So if you haven't seen some of those other episodes, definitely check them out. It's really fascinating stuff. But you'll know, as we've referenced in the past, there's some interesting Pew Research data on these matters. And a big one is a 2016 publication about the religious divide in politics. Most Protestants, evangelicals, and even some of the minority ones, Catholics, Buddhist, Hindu, Islam, they all tend to lean more to supporting the Democratic Party. The most conservative of all of these religions are hands down by far the Latter-day Saints.
Yes, and that was very shocking to me when that was brought up, because you would think, right, and it's just kind of generally conceded amongst the general population that religious people are more right-leaning. However, that hasn't been apparently not the case. according to
Yep,
Pew
not
Research.
historically true. Yep. And it
So
goes back a long time too. It goes all the way back. Time magazine article called "Religion American Melbourne" uh, details a cabal of Protestant denominations, hundreds of representatives from across the country with roots in government and in education, the higher education systems, all got together in a big conference. This isn't a conspiracy. This is fact. This happened. They had a big conference to decide what the world should look like after World War II, and they decided it should look more socialist. There should be basically one world government, that all of the world's military should be combined. That the economic system should be drastically overhauled. And basically they're going to gut America, take out all its values and reimagine it with socialist values within a greater world affair and global governance. And then they pushed all of this onto all the different religions, which have been supporting the Democratic Party ever since. The Democratic Party has been their vehicle by which to institute these ideas.
interesting. So do you suppose that these protests at General Conference and just this kind of animus that exists against a fairly milquetoast religion, a fairly milquetoast and happy, successful people who support and are generally positive members of society wherever they are,
Yep.
do you suppose that this has more to do with just a general discrediting of an entire people? Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
Oh, very much. Yeah. The more they can discredit and dissuade or distract, the better. And this has been a common tactic used globally by the CIA, organizations funding it, like USAID since the 1960s, and factions within the United States, Act Blue, for example, and others, very, very many others. I don't have the names for all of them, but there are actually a ton, a lot of them funded by George Soros. And just keep in mind, Latter-day Saints, again, the most conservative, right-leaning organization and the fourth largest voting bloc in the country are the Latter-day Saints. So the Latter-day Saints themselves and the church are, in fact, one of the biggest barriers to these progressive socialist ideologies and the progression of them. You have this huge chunk of the United States that covers basically the state, what would have been the state of Deseret, Idaho, Nevada, Utah, down into Arizona, this huge chunk that is heavily right-leaning, that is populated mostly and influenced mostly by Latter-day Saints. And that's a big chunk of the country that the Democratic Party or establishment would very much like to do away with, or at least to quiet or change. It has had an effect.
Yeah.
Just in this last election, you look at a map of all the counties and which way they shifted during the last election. It's a really cool chart. Has all these little red or blue marks on it indicating which way the country was leaning. And almost universally, in one of the biggest upturns, the majority of the country, the vast majority of the country, shifted more to the right in this last election. However, and to the surprise of many, there was a number of counties, specifically in Utah, that shifted left, where all of the rest of the country was united that in saying that the Democrat Party, this time they've gone too far and we can't support it.
Interesting.
Utah, the most conservative state in the union, somehow went more left.
Why do you think that is?
It is having an effect. There was a heavy propaganda campaign pushed in this last, really over the last 10 years. It's been all over the country, but heavily in Utah to try to change some of these votes. And it appears to have worked to some extent.
Interesting.
And it is very sneaky. You kind of have to really pay attention and watch out for it.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on the show. Are there any closing remarks that you'd like to make? Any personal experiences that you have that you'd like to share?
There is a great scripture I think was good to end on, and it's James 1:26.
Mm.
Now, I also really love 27. It's a fantastic scripture about the nature of true religion and charity and how you can identify what true religion is. But 26 is also very strong in its expression. James saying that those who espouse that they are religious and yet cannot hold their tongue only deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless.
Mm.
Doesn't that just say it all?
Yes, it does. Yeah, that seems to be the case here in these protests. That's very true. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on again and telling us this important news. I think that a lot of people will love this, and and I hope that this changes the perspective that a lot of people have about protests in Utah. I think that maybe we have, I don't know, there might be some people who, I think for the most part, people know what's going on. There might be some people out there who might be a little naive, and that's no problem. I mean, being innocent is not a problem.
Yeah.
However, I think that we need to be aware that there are forces out there that are working to change your opinion on things.
Yeah.
And they do so by astroturf means at times. Like it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a real thing.
Right.
In any case, that's just what I'd like to end on. And well, thank you again, Ryan, for coming on the show. Before
It's a
you
pleasure.
go,
I hope it's helpful.
yes, absolutely. Before you go, guys, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Our goal is to reach 20,000 subscribers by the end of 3 months, and we are well on our way to making that goal. We've made our goal for the last month, certainly, and more. So thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, bye.
Bye-bye.